Hi, I'm Melanie Ann Phillips, the co-creator of the Dramatica theory of story. And this is a standard opening you're going to see on each of a whole new series of videos I'm going to do with articles I've written over the last 4 decades, all about Dramatica theory, what it means to stories, and what it means in the real world. Now, I don't have time to do the reading of all these articles to you myself, so I've found a good text-to-speech simulator, and I'll be using that for each of the articles to read them to you so the information can get out there, because if I tried to do this myself with all the other projects I'm involved in, the information would never be available and might be lost. This way, it's right there on YouTube for you to see. So let's not waste any more time and get on with this particular topic, which starts now.
A student of Dramatica asks, what do all of these flips, rotates, and carrying the children in the story engine justification routine represent conceptually? Here's a response written by Melanie Ann Phillips, co-creator of the Dramatica theory of story.
That's actually a question that's easy to answer. The flips and rotates, and carrying the children, represent the mind responding to outside pressure. Think of it like this: if you try to solve a problem by logic and you keep getting nowhere, eventually you might stop doing that and just follow your heart. That's a flip. Now, going with your feelings is the mental weapon of choice, and logic is the backup quarterback sitting on the bench until perhaps needed again in the future. As for rotates, that changes where you start in a process. Of the 4 items in every quad, which ought to be explored first? For example, in the quad with learning, understanding, doing, and obtaining, where do you begin? You might go through them in the order above, or you might first obtain a car so you can then learn how to drive, then understand what you have to pay attention to behind the wheel, and finally just do it by taking a road trip. A quad is a family, like the families in the periodic table of elements in chemistry, such as the rare earths and the noble gases. They share certain attributes and certainly belong together, but each is an individual with its own unique traits. So when you have identified a quad that represents an area in which you need to respond due to life experience, determining the order in which to do the work can be essential to success. But note, in the example above, learning, understanding, doing, and obtaining, the rotate changed where you began going through the 4, but it didn't change the order. So, in the changed starting point we went from obtaining, to learning, then understanding, then doing, the same sequence, just with a different starting point. Flipping is spatial and rotating is temporal. But when we do them both, we actually change the sequence, not just the starting point. For example, with a flip and a rotate we might learn to plant a seed, then plant it, doing. Then understand what is needed for it to prosper, and finally obtain either dead plant or a healthy one. It is the combination of our spatial and temporal response to life experiences that determines the sequence of our problem solving, because flips and rotates together create all possible paths through a quad. That's how we try out all the alternatives in our minds for a particular problem that operates in a specific quad. For example, we learn that when you conquer a city you should pillage then burn, or you end up with nothing, as was illustrated in an old Wizard of ID comic strip where I got this example from. Or, in my own mamby-pamby example, if you put the noodles in the water and then bring it to a boil you end up with mush. But if you boil first and then add the pasta, you end up with nice firm spaghetti. Of course, we make mistakes in assessing causal relationships because we are often not paying attention to the context. This leads to the Latin phrase, post hoc ergo propter hoc, which translates as after this therefore because of this. It is a false causality. Just because something comes after something else doesn't mean it was caused by that initial condition. Still learned casualties that are cultural idioms often bear a certain amount of truth, such as one bad apple spoils the bunch, which is a temporal warning that if you let rot get into the system, or family, or company, or machine, it will eventually taint or ruin the whole thing. This is probably only half true, because whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. So dealing with the bad apple may actually improve the group or the process, in the end. But what doesn't kill you might also hobble you for life. So again, even that is only true under half the contexts. Both those examples are causal, temporal, but what about spatial? Those are contained in other idioms such as where there's smoke, there's fire, or birds of a feather flock together. Again, true under half the possible contexts, but untrue under the other half. Still, in life we do not experience all contexts. And so, we build these associations in space and time based on repeated similar experiences with few exceptions. In other words, having these expectations helps us make good choices in the life we are living. But if we change or our environment changes, those fallback approaches may be the doom of us, just as in nature evolutionary or environmental changes can spell doom for a species, or, once the asteroid hits environmental, it can doom one species and cause another, our ancestors, to prosper. Whether it is good or not absolutely depends on your point of view. But it really goes deeper than that. Some issues like the logic/feeling one are confined to a single quad and a single level of detail. But we build on those to create higher level understandings. In other words, once we made an association that this is how it best works, we stop refiguring it, assume it is a truism, and then gather a bunch of these into a higher level understanding. After all, how could we ever build a car if for every new model we had to reinvent the wheel and every other process from scratch? Bad survival technique for a mind or a society. So, when some collection of responses form a larger or extended family, we cobble them all together and just invoke that whole collection if we don't have to be specific. For example, if you believe one bad apple spoils the bunch and that where there's smoke there's fire, then if you see apple would start smoking near the base of a tree, you may determine that having an apple orchard is too risky and pass by an opportunity to own one. Silly example, but you get the idea. Essentially, we cobble together smaller life experience-derived understandings and approaches into larger ones, and those into even bigger ones until we've maxed out our mental resolution. And this is what taking the children represents. Life experience can set in place at any one of the 4 levels of the model. When it is just pertinent to a single quad of consideration, the children don't come along for the ride when we flip and rotate. But if we believe that whole category of considerations needs to change, then the children go with the parent and the whole shebang is flipped and/or rotates. Wow. So when an author is answering questions in Dramatica, he or she is really designing what kind of life experiences the story mind has had. And the engine does the math to ensure that this progressive layering of one assumption on another accurately follows the way the mind does it by nature. We call that the process of justification or the justification wind-up in the model. Justification is not bad, it is just the process of building larger assumptions on smaller ones as one tries to navigate life. Sometimes we are right, sometimes we make mistakes, and sometimes we start out right but the situation changes and now what once worked is a mistake. But the other part of that quad of outcomes that few write about is when someone makes a mistake but the situation changes and now they are right. I'm morally conflicted. Just kidding, I have no morals. Also, just kidding. So there you have a basic response to your question about what flips, rotates, and carrying the children is all about conceptually. Now, keep in mind this only describes how justifications are made. But, you can't just reverse the process to get out of them. Each justification is like winding a spring and then having it hold the tension with a ratchet. Every one added contributes a new wound spring, also held in place. And higher-level justifications wind up whole groups of springs as if they were a single larger spring, a bigger parent quad. All of this wound-up tension is what powers a story, or a mind, but if there is something in error somewhere in it, or something that has become a problem that worked before, then you need to find it, as we are not inclined to throw out everything we know and start from scratch unless forced to. And so, like pick-up sticks or a game of Jenga, we unwind the springs one by one, trying not to have the whole thing snap apart like a cross between a mental mousetrap, a house of cards, and all of the carefully stacked rows of dominoes over the whole floor of our minds. The way this happens is that the initial wind-up is the structural backstory for a narrative. Then, the influence character, who represents the devil's advocate voice in our heads, begins to question the validity of the main character's point of view, our current outlook. At first, we resist, but by the end of the story, or of our narrative explanation of trying to solve our problems in life, a new paradigm has been built that is just as big and complex as our currently held view and offers a solution to our problems that we can't find in our present perspective. But it has never been tried. And we have to choose between the promising new kid on the block or to stick by our guns and hold on to our established outlook in the hopes that if we hang on long enough, the problem will work itself out eventually. That's what a leap of faith is all about, the choice between two worldviews, one that offers a path to success but has never been tried, and one that has always worked until now, so is tried and true but not currently working. Hey, I think that's quite enough for today. See ya.